So I've scripted in part a documentary, and the documentary is called The Empty Chair. I'd like to use the following animation as it's like the opening vignette. And it's supposed to be the first of 5 personal stories told firsthand from people who have called or who have made Singapore their home. See, we all tell stories. We tell them all the time. We also tell ourselves stories. The animation is called Connecting the Dots. This is my great-grandfather, Joseph William Lloyd. He was a Welshman living in Malaysia. This is my father's family. It's part of my mother's family. Engagement, marriage, kids. It was my father, the eldest in his family, who took the leap and ventured out to make a life of his own. He left first and later brought my mother and the 5 of us. So my earliest memories of growing up on Christmas Island are of Flying Fish Cove, scaling the excavated limestone pinnacles, fishing, and the annual red crab migration, which is what most people know about Christmas Island. But this is where I grew up, and it was a great place to grow up. That's where I spent my childhood, my boyhood. Now, each year we traveled back to Malaysia and Singapore, courtesy of my father's work. Privileged plane rides, catching up with cousins. We traveled through Singapore and Malaysia every year. And I loved the food choices in Old Town Telok Blangah. I vividly remember the day we left Christmas Island after 9 years. It was a mostly quiet ride to the airport, as 3 of my elder siblings had already left home for boarding school on mainland Australia. Now, having relocated several times, I can relate to the storm of uncertainty that must have been brewing in my parents' mind, especially what was to happen next. And I think they're hiding it well here. So I finished off schooling in Australia, and I came to understand later, only later, why we made our trips every year to Singapore and Malaysia. What the company had to do was interrupt our stay on the island. Christmas Island belongs to Australia. If you stay more than 12 months, you are eligible for permanent residence. So the company interrupt our 12 months so that we couldn't apply for permanent residence. And this was true for my father and for all employees of the British Phosphate Company. So in the 1970s, Christmas Island was a colonial relic. And the White Australia policy has been committed to history. There are growing pains of nationhood, I guess. But sharp with historical irony, I've actually come back. And of course, the place looks very different to me now. I think my slideshow ends here, but you get the idea, right? It's been a long time, and the way that I see Singapore, I'm just an indentured laborer here. I have no value beyond economic utility or productive capacity. I no longer have dog tags. I have a barcode. I have a green card, I have a holographic photo, and I have my fingerprint. That goes together with the mild superstition that while I have the right to live, I have to earn a living. Looking around today, I see myself as part of an ongoing struggle, no different to what went on Christmas Island in the 1970s. At a fundamental level, this is about identity and worth, beyond what we are told to be true. So the story thus far is mine. I expect the vignette of mine will finish with some poetic phrase like, "I woke one morning to find in the mirror the reflection of my father." The documentary will include 5 other stories. An expat, a migrant laborer, maybe a Singaporean Chinese family, a domestic helper, and I hope to show these 5 stories as hopelessly intertwined, but they actually don't see it. These stories we tell ourselves and each other have the potential to define us. Perhaps in the busyness of our lives, it becomes a story of where we've been and where we're going. We miss singling out the moment. What about now? I suspect there is a reality that exists outside our story, and there's a certain unreality in our world of concepts and ideas. So much so that if you're not careful, your life may take on a single dimension. If we're only interested in the next thing, our lives might read like a cheap piece of fiction. The life that I am is beyond doubt. It is the same of every form of life, the formless essence of all life. And to be aware of that, I see my own appearance as a kind of heavy disguise. This is the consciousness element. Potentially, this might be overtaken by more practical, say, economic considerations. I started out wanting to make a film about Singapore from what was essentially an angry mental position. You see, Singapore's arcing narrative disconnects rather than draws different parts of the population together. The myth of Singapore is like the myth of human nature. It hides more than it reveals. And as a historian, I am profoundly aware of the power of story. Over time, I've seen my own story as kind of burdensome. And by contemplating the story, I actually find the process of making this documentary quite cathartic. I don't want to be weary. I don't want my life to go stale. And I certainly don't want it to be pointless. As a parting gesture, whenever I leave Singapore, the empty chair will explore the stories in such a way that people will be able to shed their own story and for them to see themselves in each other. By the end of the film, my own story is supposed to fade into the background, to disappear. It may well end up on the editing room floor, but as much as our stories are intimately intertwined, they are just stories. And when we take them away, there is a single essence. We all know how our stories are going to end. Ultimately, I believe, there is no other. When we meet each other, we are only meeting ourselves. So figuratively, the stories are one and the same. You can make the connections yourself, and you begin to see yourself in the other. And for me, this was the real inflection point in my life. These stories we hang on to, the psychological attachment to the story. What defines me? They don't mean anything to me. Because I understand at a fundamental level that at the end, all that's left is the empty chair.